Good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot. Today we're going to discuss Germany, the elections which were held there, and the outcomes and the effect it is going to have on Ukraine. And to talk us through this and educate us about all this is Ambassador Gurjit Singh. Ambassador Gurjit Singh, welcome to Gunner Shot. Long time. I've been missing you personally.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Right. For those of you who probably don't know, Ambassador Gurjit Singh was our ambassador to West Germany, or rather Germany. And I wouldn't say West Germany to Germany. So he knows what's happening there and the importance of these elections uh, for everything else. And he knows the intricacies of these elections. And on our part, we don't know very clearly what is the issue in the German elections. What are the outcomes? Who's going to form the party and all that? All we know is who's voted how and all that. And this gives you the snapshot of what it is. Elections were held. It's very clear that the Social Democratic Party got 16% votes. The Christian Democratic Union and the Christian Social Union got 28.5% votes. The Greens got about 11% votes. The Free Democratic Party got 4.33% votes. The AFD, which he's going to talk of, and that's a new trend, got 20.8%. The left got 8.7%. The BSW got 4.9%, and others got another 4.59%. Overall, no one's got a clear majority, and the picture is confusing as to who will form the party, who will form the government, and how the government will be formed. That is up. And of course, when you look at it at the spread, there's a stark thing which comes out. The map on the left indicates to you the spread of votes as of today. And if you see on the right is the Germany between 45 and 90, where it was the West German and East German. If you see the AFD, the alternative for German for democracy, uh, in West Germany or in Germany, got the majority votes from the East. So there's a clear divide. And what does this portend for us? And out of this, a couple of questions do come in. And the first question is how, I mean, we have to understand how this election process has gone through and who will form the government and all that. And then, secondly, we'll have to see how this government, when is formed, what will be its effect on the larger Europe. Because Germany itself, its economy and social structure, all that are in problems, and which I'm sure the ambassador will touch on. And the third thing is directly connected to what happened in the Oval Room with Zelensky being kicked out by Trump. Complete Europe in turmoil. The three big economies of Europe, Germany, France, I won't say Europe, and Europe including UK, Germany, France, and UK, they have to get together and put something together and take a call whether they're going to support Ukraine and continue to prosecute the war with Russia, or put something together, go to Trump and say, okay, let's end the whole story. And one of the linchpins in this is Germany. And as I'm sure the ambassador will say, Germany is at its probably the weakest, at least I've known. And this is the broad thing as we understand it. But what are the intricacies of this and what are the issues? This is important for us as we go ahead. So, with this, I'd request you to take over and give your views and educate us on this whole story. All yours, sir.
Thank you, General Shankar. Good evening to you and all viewers. Happy to be back on Gunner's Shot. I would always like to be on Gunner's Shot, but it is my policy to come and speak only on something I really know about. So I don't know that much. So therefore, my appearances on your show are restricted by the limits of my knowledge. And that is the way I work on it. Germany, I hope I know something about it. I have
Oh,
been a
yes, sir, you know quite a bit. If you've been an ambassador there, you know hell of a lot more than all of us put together who are watching this. I'm very sure of that.
also study Germany since my retirement to keep abreast. I was last there in November and taking a look at what is happening. And certainly, what is happening in Germany is worrisome. So, Germany is supposed to be Europe's largest economy, and it is also the country which is committed to the European project, which means the European Union, European unity, the European personality. Traditionally, it was Germany, France, and Britain, when Britain was in the EU, who guided the strategic policy of the European Union. And it was France and Germany which largely determined economic policy. Since Brexit, Britain is not in the mix, but as you can see currently, they are trying to play a role. And the rising economy of other countries, particularly the Nordics, Austria, some of the East Europeans, they are becoming more assertive. So, Germany's position in Europe will stem from a very strong economy and a very clear strategic doctrine. Now, both these are under challenge. And when Germany went into these elections, it was like an early poll because the real polls were only expected around September. But the inability of the traffic light coalition of three parties, so SPD, Greens, and the FDP, Free Democrats, was not working harmoniously for some time. And ultimately, they could not take it anymore. It was perhaps a major miscalculation on the part of the Free Democrats who challenged the Chancellor to the point that he sacked their leader as the finance minister. And the FDP thought they will get a sympathy vote and return to the Bundestag in a stronger position. The net result is the FDP is not in the Bundestag this year. You can see 4.33%. There's a threshold of 5%. If you don't attain 5% of votes, you will not be in the Bundestag. So, this is the point at which I would like to explain how the German elections ran in 2025. One of the significant differences between the 2025 election and the two previous elections was that this year the total number of seats is fixed at 630, whereas in the last two elections there was a slight flexibility in the number of seats. In the last parliament, it even went up to 736, making them the largest parliament in the world. But that happened to a complex of factors. And to reform that, in 2023, they undertook electoral reforms and came to the system under which the current election was conducted. Now, each German voter has two votes. One vote is for a candidate in a particular constituency, and there are 299 constituencies divided over the 16 landers or 16 states. Why the states are important? Because the partner of the CDU, which is the CSU, the Catholic Socialist Union, they actually won all the seats in Bavaria. And that is the core strength that they have. So that is why the lander is important because it leads to pockets of influence. The second part is that the remaining seats, which are 331, I think, are distributed on the basis of proportional representation. So the second vote that every German elector has is to vote for a party. And now, when the totals are tallied up, the party which scores X percentage is given Y number of seats. And if you don't get 5%, you will not be in the parliament. So this time there are two casualties from the last parliament. One is the Free Democrats, who did not get 5%. And the other is the BSW. You see the orange, 4.97%. The Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance. Now, Sarah Wagenknecht was part of the left in East Germany. And during the last Bundestag, during the term of the Bundestag, they split from the left and had 10 members of parliament who had been elected with the left but separated. Now, the BSW did very well in 2 or 3 state elections in the East German states. So they thought that they are going to max it this time. But look what the voters did to them. Gave them 4.97. They are not in parliament despite having split, gone on a high, and taken a separate street from the left. The left has increased its vote share. So now in this parliament, due to the proportional representation, there are only 5 parties in parliament. The SPD, which has now 120 seats, the CDU, CSU together, which have 208 seats, the Greens, which have 95 seats, the AFD, which has doubled its vote share, is up to 152 seats, and the left has got 64 seats. So there are only 5 parties. Now, every party, mainstream party, said earlier that we will not form a government with the AFD or with the left. Interestingly, both get majorities out of the East Germany. So when you separate the 152 seats of the AFD and the 64 seats of the left, and you need a majority of 316, you're only left with the CDU, the SPD, and the Greens. Now, the Greens with 95 cannot form a two-party coalition because neither of the two parties, if they take the Greens, reach that 316 figure. So the Greens can only come in as a third party. But if the SPD and the CDU are evidently going to come together as the only arithmetical alternative, then this is what used to be called the Grand Alliance between the two leading opposition parties to come together. But they have been in government long enough today that nobody now considers it unusual. So between them, they would have about 328 seats, which is over the majority of 360. So the only stable majority of two parties can be between the CDU, CSU and the SPD. Now, this is different from the last parliament when there was a three-party coalition. Now, three-party coalition, as most recently seen, is very difficult to run and even difficult to form. So it is better that the Germans now look for a two-party coalition. Now, one problem in German elections is that after they are conducted, it takes good 2 months normally for the parties to agree on a program and then agree to form a coalition. I don't think Germany today has got the luxury of 2 months. They need to take action urgently and must fix a coalition as soon as possible because the first sitting of the Bundestag will be later this month. What were the issues in this election which led to these changed results? The one issue was certainly the economy. So we need to realize that while a lot of people are guessing what Germany will do in strategic and foreign policy terms, this election was not fought on any of those issues. It was fought on domestic issues. And the biggest domestic issue is the economy. For the last 2 years, Germany is in recession. Since COVID, their growth is dismal. Currently, it is 0.3%. Now, with such a growth rate, Germany cannot be treated like an economic powerhouse. And if they don't have a robust economy, it raises questions on their leadership in Europe. And I think this is very important. I think the normal German doesn't really care whether Germany is a European leader. He worries why his cost of living is so high, why rents are so high, why all kinds of medical expenses are high, my infrastructure is poor, and suddenly I'm not looking like a great economy. One of the biggest contributors to this is the energy crisis. When Germany broke with Russia after the invasion of Ukraine, it put sanctions on energy imports, which was the basis of German economic growth for the last few years, from Merkel times. Russian energy at cheap prices. So not only is German industry not getting it, German people are paying very high prices. And this is inflationary. Second aspect is that with the growing amount of immigration, many Germans perceived that their welfare benefits were being curbed and being spent on immigrants rather than on them. Now, this may or may not be true, but that was the perception. And in the recent months, there were four major terrorist attacks by individual people ramming their cars into people at different places, all of which turned out to be migrants, therefore raising the annoyance and anxiety among German people about the migrants. Surprisingly, this issue of migration is a bigger concern in East Germany than in West Germany, though most migrants are in West Germany. Why? It is because the economy of East Germany is not doing well. And people in East Germany are more badly affected by poor economic performance, and consequently, the blame on migration is much more. And as you had pointed out in your slides, it is the sweep of the AFD in the East, which is the core of their success. But don't forget that the revival of the left is also in the East. And if you see that one blue spot among the red on that chart, that is Berlin, which was won by the left, by other than anybody else. So, the inability of Germany over all these years to successfully integrate East Germany economically, have more investment, raise more welfare has failed. And East German people, though smaller in population, but still enough on seats, are giving a resounding knock to the system. Now, this election saw a record turnout of nearly 83%, which is huge. Of the electorate, there was a 9% increase over the voter turnout of 2021. Though the electorate this time was slightly smaller, in 2021 it was 61 million, this time it was 59 point something million, but the turnout was huge. Now, I want to tell you two significant things about voter behavior. One is that there were 2 million new voters who are largely young Germans, but 750,000 were legalized migrants who were voting for the first time. Out of these 750,000, 250,000 were Syrian origin. Now, these migrants are certainly not going to vote AFD. So, who did they vote for? But the young German said that the party which is speaking best in my interest is the AFD. So, surprisingly, the young Germans either voted AFD or voted the left. And they deserted the major parties in a big way. Of course, now this is a generalization I'm making, and possibly not true in every lander. But generally speaking, the young people ditched the big parties and went for the extreme parties. The third big issue after migration and the economy was whether the green climate agenda is something that Germany can afford. You know, when Germany suffered this economic backlash because of the energy crisis, they had shut down all their nuclear power plants. And of course, they shut down their coal plants. So when gas prices went up, they ended up paying more. It would have been better for them to keep the nuclear option going. So sometimes the green agenda, the climate agenda, while morally very good, its costs are pretty high for the German people. And now I come to the final point that the German industry was very unhappy with this green economy and the costs it was bringing onto them. Do you know that in Germany, very few EVs or gas based vehicles are produced? The main production of in manufacturing is still on automobiles, and they are losing the Chinese market, but they are selling in China out of their Chinese production, but not so much in exports to China. So German industry requires production lines in China to sustain profitability because German rules on climate finance, climate sustainability, and the market under a non performing economy are restricting German companies from making profits within Germany itself. This is a major crisis. And therefore, you must understand that German industry is not in favor of a China plus one solution at the present time, which the German government, particularly the Greens, were advocates of. Now, with German industry not doing well, employment falls, indiscipline in workers falls, you can't sack them, you can't discipline them. The social compact in Germany stood broken under the last government. People were unhappy with the economy, unhappy with reduced welfare, unhappy with employment. All these were not issues in the past. Germany had full employment and the economy was robust. So, in these circumstances, it was evident that the current coalition was going to be negatively impacted in the elections. The SPD, whose figures you showed us, has fallen to its lowest level of vote share since 1877. This 16.41% is something which they never had since the 19th century. So this is a real setback for the SPD. The Greens have fallen by 3 to 5% from last election. And this is also a rather poor result for them over the last 10 years. And FDP, of course, has fallen to the lowest level since about 1990. The CDU, CSU is the lead party. Now, did they win the election? They came first for sure. I would have thought, had they crossed the 30% vote mark, I would have called them clear winners. There were poll predictions that they would cross 30%, 31%. But on polling day, they did not get that. So I think the CDU, CSU combined has to be put in the winner column and the loser column. Loser for not beating expectations. The AFD is the clear winner. And the moment they won, they said, we are ready to join a government, but all others say, we don't want to join you. The left is the winner. So the two winners are actually going to be left out of government. And the government will be formed by the losers, particularly the SPD. The SPD, situation is you do your worst in almost more than 100 years, but yet you will be part of the government. Now, let's take up two issues, which I think are three issues, very important for the next government. One is the defense budget. You know that they have reached 2% of GDP on defense as per NATO demand. And they had created a 100 billion euro special fund after the Ukraine crisis, which is largely spent. But the total German forces are less than 200,000. So, what big thing can you do with such few people? When they say we deploy one division in Lithuania, it takes away 10% of your armed forces. So, there is a lot of investment required in defense and their willingness to support European defense and Ukraine. Where will this money come from? Especially if the GDP is diminishing. 2% of a diminishing GDP is actually less money than 2% of 2022. Second, German infrastructure is in deep trouble. Their trains are in a mess, autobahns haven't been repaired for ages, the digital economy has no investments, and local energy and transmission lines are not efficient anymore. How Germany needs a huge dose of public investment. This will make efficiency in governance and in industry. Finally, you need more welfare because, like all Western societies, aging society, younger people not working, so not enough taxation. How are you going to balance your books? Now, when you have these issues, this is where one of the reasons why the FDP and the SPD fell out. There is something called a debt break as in a handbrake. There is a constitutional provision introduced by Angela Merkel around 2009-10 that public debt of the government cannot exceed 0.35% of GDP. Now, you cannot undertake huge defense expenditure, huge investment expenditure with that limitation. So FDP did not want to relent on that, and SPD wanted that happen. So that was the breaking point. The coalition broke on that. But you don't have a change in the debt break. Now, when Chancellor candidate Merz of the CDU was asked, everybody is very cagey about talking about breaching the debt break in public pronouncements. Though everybody knows that is what is required. So when Merz was asked, what about this? He said, well, we'll find other ways. We are willing to discuss this, but not willing to take the responsibility that they will be the ones to breach the debt break. But General Shankar, the real reason is that once the SPD and CDU form a coalition, they would not have a two-third majority in the new Bundestag. And to breach the debt break and amend the constitution, they need a two-third majority. And for that, they would then need to go to the AFD. AFD may agree, but they will extract a pound of flesh.
Kind of
And
like, yes.
the situation is that the moment any mainstream party says, I want AFD help, the public will come out on the streets. Now, what Merz is telling the SPD is that you are still running the Bundestag. The government is still there. Why don't you do this amendment to
Before
the
you,
debt? You are three parties or two parties. We will also come with you with our votes and we'll be able to amend it because the AFD has only few seats. But in the next parliament, we will not be able to do this. I suspect the SPD may agree, but they will want a huge quid pro quo if for the next government, for themselves. One of the ways out, which could be done by the present Bundestag without necessarily breaching the debt break and not seeking a constitutional amendment, is under emergency provisions, set up a further defense fund. Instead of 100 billion, put 400 billion. And set up an infrastructure fund with, let's say, 250 billion. Now, those being emergency one-time provisions are not considered a breach of the debt break and therefore could be done. But again, I think they would prefer to legislate that in the current Bundestag rather than the new one, because they are unsure of what the AFD will do, and they don't want to beseech the AFD for support for anything. But having said this, let us look at the issue of migration. The all the parties today are almost on the same page on migration. They are putting border controls. SPD has put them. CDU wants them. This is in breach of EU norms. Now they are saying no more asylum seekers from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria because there's relative peace over there. Why should we take more asylum seekers? And people whose asylum has been rejected, the mainstream party said they should be sent back. The AFD goes beyond. They said all the refugees who came from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and countries now at peace should be sent back, even if they are German citizens now. Why are they here? That is the extreme position. So, we are all worried about the Americans putting people on planes and sending them back. Don't be surprised if Germany starts putting people on planes and sending them back to Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, because the public demands that. Now, while you may have a commonality of approach on this, there is a difference of approach on Russia. The AFD says, why are we breaking with Russia? We need Russia for energy. That should be our priority. And not said in the if the cost of that is to dump Ukraine, just dump Ukraine, but they don't say that. Now, on Ukraine, we should know that the Germans and French, along with Ukraine and Russia, had, since the Crimean occupation, something called the Minsk process, which was trying to solve the Ukraine issue without war and without the United States. Today, what Trump is trying to do is again try to solve the problem by reducing war and leaving out Europe instead, returning the favor. But as late as February of 2022, before the war broke out, the Germans were telling the Biden administration, why are you poking your nose? We will handle Russia and Ukraine through the Minsk process. But the provocations of Russia were too much and Russia invaded, putting an end to the Minsk process. But also putting an end to the trade for security complex that Germany had created. So Germany has suffered a lot out of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And today, the Germany of 2022, which said no war but peace, is a total reversal. They have totally come behind America and NATO to oppose Russia and support Ukraine. Now that the Americans are changing tack, Germans have two options. One, to pay more for Ukrainian defense. To what end, I am not so sure. First, the German economy is not so strong to sustain greater defense expenditure now from Germany. The state of German armed forces is not such that they could actually deter Russia in Ukraine, even if they were planted there. But I will not be surprised if, provoked by America's openings to Russia, the Germans reopen discussions with Russia on energy. I mean, that would be very pragmatic in my view. Doesn't look likely today, but I think one of the most pragmatic things they could do is that. If the transatlantic alliance is breaching, then it is for Europe in general, Germany in particular, to have a nuanced relationship with Russia and China at variance from the United States. This is one of the consequences which could emerge from a new government. But it is a bit far. As I said, the government change is coming on domestic issues and not on foreign policy. Foreign policy issues are a consequence. I do not see any hurry between the SPD and the CDU to form a government. I think there's more hurry in trying to get the current government to do things before the Bundestag is dissolved. But some negotiations have started. I think the German newspaper, The Bild, has already given some details that some practical measures may be found to set the pace for a robust revival of Germany. Now, the next question is, can Germany become a determinator of European leadership and role in a strained relationship with the United States? So I think two, three things, as I said earlier: one, the economy; second, their own defense budgets. Can they marshal the European Union together? I think it will be worth noticing whether Chancellor Merz, when he becomes Chancellor, how long does he take before he goes to Washington? As you know, that no German leader was invited to the Trump inauguration. Only Alex Weidel, the leader of the AfD, was invited. And when Vice President Vance came to the Munich Security Conference and talked down to Europe, he met only the right wingers. He met Alex Weidel. And he castigated German parties for declaring them as untouchable, as saying, you must work with AfD. Why are you ignoring them? And as you know, Elon Musk has been tweeting rapidly in favor of the AfD, supporting them, which in a normal country would be called electoral interference. So this is the situation that German government has to now determine how quickly it can have a robust governance agenda. Can it kickstart the economy? Can it play a bigger defense role? Will it be nimble footed in diplomacy? That means I certainly see they are not going to give up the China market. Can they be nimble footed with Russia? And consequently, nimble footed with the Trump administration. I don't think the Trump administration is coming to them in any big hurry. Can they go and get something from them? Or will they just stick around Europe trying to build strategic autonomy? But that strategic autonomy will only make sense if they have an opening to Russia. Because holding up Ukraine is now becoming their burden rather than any sense of autonomy. Strategic autonomy to them means an independent policy on Russia and an independent policy on China. Do we see any possible change in the policy towards India? I don't think so. Both parties are committed to a relationship with India. Both are committed to the Indo-Pacific, in which India is important. The high priority that Merkel and Scholz accorded to India may take a little bit of a backseat because they have other things to deal with right now, like Ukraine, Russia, China, USA. So, since India is not a crisis factor in German thinking, they will still see India as an important pole in the world. And if under the strategic autonomy of Germany, they are going to assert themselves in a multipolar world, then the importance of India as another pole in that order is extremely important. I think I will stop here and we can perhaps have a discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, sir. The picture you have painted uh, is of a Germany which is neither here nor there. It's not the power which it was, nor can you ignore it, right? And it has you. It's very clearly, at least for the foreseeable future, for a couple of years, Germany has to struggle within itself to come up or go down, whichever way, we don't know because everything is up for grabs. But clearly, one of their outlets or one of the ways of their getting back, one is, go back to Russia for energy, cheap gas. So, in this kind of an equation, will Germany throwing in weight with USA to make a deal with Russia and sacrifice Ukraine? Will it come about? And do you think that Germany will have a voice along with UK and France to get such a thing through? Because at this point of time, UK and France are not very coordinated in their approach to this whole story. So where does Germany stand in this mix?
The Germans were always the most efficient in forming a European axis between France and earlier
Yeah,
the
that's
UK.
gone.
Yeah, that's gone.
That's
But now,
virtually gone now.
during the SPD Scholz period, the relationship with Macron has not been good. So
Yeah.
the Franco-German axis has also not worked. Now, Merz can bring together the UK and Macron with him. But all said and done, since Brexit, the Europeans still see the UK as a US acolyte first and European later. So to think that the UK will be in the forefront, like they seem today, hosting a summit and all that, I don't think this is a sustainable position. Macron's own position is unsustainable. They will probably end up with a right wing government sooner or later. So they are unstable. Now, you ask the pertinent question that if Germany is to nimble footedly reopen energy relationship with Russia, does it mean they need to give up on Ukraine? That they can't for moral reasons for now. But they can do it under the cover of the United States. If Zelensky had agreed to a ceasefire, then the urgency for Germany to provide defense equipment to Ukraine diminishes. And therefore they would not be pulled. Yes, they would increase defense expenditure, improve their forces for sure, but they need not rush into supporting Ukraine. And if there is a ceasefire, then you don't need to sacrifice Ukraine to talk to Russia. So I think there would be a lot of disappointment in Germany at the way the Zelensky Trump meeting ended. But I think they will look for it to revive.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
a
know,
that's it.
Germany is a big country with a big imprint, but not having big capabilities today. They need
Yeah.
to they need to have a big protein shake before they get going.
The way you described it and my own assessment indicates that there's no protein coming from anywhere. And especially with the fact that the internal societal problems are huge. They have, the East German factor is predominant, right wing. The fact of immigration, whether it's true or correct in whatever way you look at it, is a factor which will create a social churn. As much as they depend on China, they have a problem with China economically. They have to go to China, but they have a problem with China. So if that relationship also is taken beyond a point, it hurts them economically, and they're buying costly gas. So I don't see how Germany is going to recover. And if they don't recover, you and make Europe strong, you'll see a weak Europe. If there's a weak Europe, right? And like you rightly said, France is not in a great position. UK is just hollow drum, right? Then we are looking at eventually going the Trump way to Ukraine, or rather in the Ukraine war, not the UK thing. Am I right, or you have a different variance to what I'm talking?
No, I don't have a variance, but I am a little skeptical of putting my neck out to say what is going to happen. I can give you because everything like up in the air.
There.
Germany is actually unsettled. France is unsettled. And the Trump administration is unsettling everybody. So, how the dust will settle will actually show.
Yeah. So in this kind of a scenario, sir, let me turn the tables. How do you how do you see Russia behaving? Because in this entire game, I mean, I feel that Russia is pretty stable at this point of time. They're stable. They have their political cards in place. They have their economic cards in place. They also have their, what they want out of territorially out of Ukraine and everything, and their military plan in place. And they seem to be holding all cards. Whereas Europe doesn't have any cards really to play, really, right? Barring big talk.
Russia
And
have an election. So, which Germany and the US have had. They
but do
have
we
fought.
know how Russian elections turn out? We know that, sir.
I mean, they don't have that vagary and they have
They
fought,
don't have that
which they have not won, but they've also not lost.
lost. So the point is, uh, I mean, I look at it that does Trump and co have a cogent uh, plan to, make good with Russia? I don't see that either
I
because,
think the
well,
Trump administration would like to have an opening to Russia in the hope that if Russia is given assurances on the Ukraine and there is a ceasefire, forget about an agreement, a ceasefire, that may wean Russia away from the Chinese, who are
Chinese.
the
Yeah,
real
that
of the Americans.
one thing is, of course, very clear in this whole story. Trump is focusing on China, and in the part of focusing on China, he wants to finish the Russia-Ukraine war, even if it means giving some concessions to Russia. And probably giving some concessions to Russia will make it automatically, denude the relationship, or shall I say, weaken the relationship between Russia and China. That's his apparent game plan. And I feel to even for that to succeed, a weak Germany doesn't help.
A weak Germany does not good for anybody.
Not good
So,
for anybody.
not good for Europe. So, if from our point of view, Indian point of view, we want Europe as a separate pole. And the visit of the European delegation recently shows that they want us as a separate pole. But for that, Germany has to succeed.
Has to succeed.
Yes. Now, for that, what
So
can we do?
we really don't have a way forward on this. I don't know if India Germany cooperation we open a track now, because for many countries, like you rightly said, uh, India is a hedge option for all countries today. Whether it's
Yeah.
Europe, whether it's France, whether it's USA, or even for Russia, India is the hedge option. And even to a large extent, even for China, India is the hedge option globally, geopolitically. In this kind of a scenario, is there a case for us to try and open our uh, pipelines to Germany in a better way? Because Germany is full of technology. Is there a case for us to make a deal with them to get more technology and open our markets to them?
I think that is happening. That is not stopped. The problem is that the technology is largely in the private sector. So the German private sector has to give priority to India. But I tried to explain that though the German government gives priority to India and wants the China plus one solution, German industry in their current state of play are not ready for China plus one. So therefore, they will look at India, but not with the kind of priority that we want.
Fine. So, so as we have seen, all of you who are watching this podcast, this is a pretty important podcast because we have now understood Germany, which was the linchpin of Europe for the ever since EU was formed, and even say about 3 to 4 years back, it was Germany which was powering the EU geopolitics, economy, and everything. Today seems to be its weakest link. So the complete dynamic has changed. The global dynamic has changed. A weak Germany weakens the EU considerably. And that paves for an uncertain global order as we go ahead. And India has to be cognizant of this fact as to how to play its own cards in the emerging global order. So, since we've spoken about the emerging global order, and I've made a statement that India seems to be the hedge for everyone. Where do you see India heading in this global order, and what do you see India's role? I've made this statement. You might like to contend with it or explain it further.
No, I agree with you. So there is a kind of a circle rotating with circular motion in different powers. And that whoosh which is coming out of it is keeping India up there. We are the one pole which everybody wants to talk to. If we could grow at 8 to 10% per annum, we would become a bigger player in this game. We at this moment, we are a hedge. You're right, we are a hedge. But I think we need to become a determinant of the global order. We are doing it right by taking the correct positions. But we should be able to do more. And that can only happen when our growth rate, yes, 5.4 to 6% for a large economy right now, when Germany is growing at 0.3 looks great, no? But like Germany needs to grow, India needs to grow. So India needs 8 to 10% growth. And then we will be a big power. Yes, it may happen by 2047. Viksit Bharat may happen. But I think the opportunities for India to be a bigger player on the world stage are earlier than 2047, given the current state of play that we have discussed.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, sir. Actually, today, at this point of time, uh, the issue at hand is what should India do to transform itself from a hedge to a determinant of the global order.
Yes, correct.
And that determinant is today, if you're growing at about 6.5%, this is the last quarter GDP. And if you consider that the previous quarter GDP was an outlier, and right, and you're looking at about 6.5. I think anyway, if you start crossing about 7.5 to 8, 7.5, 1 more % of GDP will start us getting the dividends which we actually see, and probably the multiplier effect will kick in. So that's something which you have today is for me a major takeaway from that. Second takeaway, major takeaway is Germany is going to remain weak for the next 3 to 4 years, no matter what happens. And the elections have said, and the German people have said what they have to say. So I think they're very important things which we have come out with. Should we take a few questions before we conclude?
Certainly.